So I wanted to continue this video by talking about how different individual ways that we can honor our ancestors and that we can have some kind of closure in this time when traditional funerals and wakes are unavailable to us. Early on in the coronavirus pandemic, a young woman in my town lost her life in a car accident, and this was just a few days after things had really gotten tightened down, which means that there was no wake and there was no funeral, and this was something that caused a great deal of grief and feelings of loss. I mean, already there's a feeling of loss over losing somebody, but then the added feeling of loss that came from not being able to mourn in the ways that we know. One of the things that happened around this young woman's loss was that the community that I'm part of, we all went out in about 9 o'clock at night and drummed and sang. And it wasn't the whole town, but it was a large group of people. And we don't live anywhere near each other because we live in a very rural town. So you couldn't really hear the other people drumming or singing, but you could hear the dogs. The dogs were kind of like our space holder. They were barking all over town. So even though I couldn't hear anybody else drumming, if I stopped drumming, I could hear the dogs, and I knew that the dogs from their locations were barking as well because they could hear somebody in their neck of the woods that was drumming. This was the beginning of my real interest in wanting to help people to find other ways of celebrating their loved ones who were crossing and of mourning, because I knew how important it was, because I could see that, you know, where I live in this really beautiful little community and was part of a pretty, you know, a spiritual group of people that live in this town. We were more likely to have our own way of doing things anyways, or to step outside of that normal radius. And so, you know, that came easier. But there are so many people who have no idea what it means to mourn or to give honor outside of what they've experienced, which is, you know, going to a funeral home and having a wake in which we honor or speak or sit with our dead and get to say our last words and maybe touch their body, and then a funeral. You know, as a medium for years, I have said that this was in many ways a very it was not enough to begin with, because our mourning practices have been homogenized, particularly in the 1950s, when Americans wanted to become like, you know, everything had to be like Leave It to Beaver and the Cunninghams. We were trying to homogenize into this image of what it meant to be American. And somehow in that we lost a lot of our mourning traditions, the ways in which we honor our dead, the ways in which we gather together to, you know, help that soul. So traditionally a wake was 3 days. And during that 3 days, a person was generally sat with. It meant that somebody literally was sitting with the body. And the wake was, you know, is a time period, that 3-day period is a very potent time for spirit, where I talked earlier about the gray and how, you know, spirits being in the gray, usually within that 3-day time period of a person's death, their spirit is very active and spending a lot of their time traveling wherever they need to, instantaneously, because they no longer have a body, but traveling wherever they need to in order to see all the people who are remembering them, who are mourning them, who loved them, and the ways that they're getting to glimpse themselves in a way that they've never seen before. They're getting to glimpse themselves from multiple spaces of how people felt about them. And that's a really deep perspective. And people do very often experience spirit communication of some kind of spirit contact from their loved ones during that 3-day period. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're so active and they're really being fueled by how much attention is being poured into them. And, so when you are unable to have a wake, a time period where people can come and give honor to that spirit or that person who's passed, and you're not able to do it in the traditional ways, one of the ways that you can do it that is an alternative is you can have that wake by setting a time that everybody is going to think about that person. So maybe it's in our own individual houses. We all say that on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning, we're still all going to be there to honor this person that we loved. And that might mean that we do it differently in different households. Other ways that you can have that kind of mourning experience, you could actually do it with a Facebook page that was set up for the person who's passed, in which you actually kind of transform the page into a mourning page, and that you ask people to leave their memories, not just their condolences, but their memories. Because remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give honor to this person who's passed. We're trying to share with them our feelings and our emotions. And I know that not all of us have deaths where somebody leaves our life where things were on a great footing. And so there's also, doesn't mean that you write something crappy on their mourning wall, but it means that you do give yourself time to have that conversation if you need to, with the person in spirit. That you sit and you really focus on them, because remembering they're going to be hearing you and looking for all the people who are thinking about them, and that you say the things you wish you could have said. You can do it out loud, you can do it in your head. It doesn't matter. One of the things I do find is that if we say it out loud, we have a tendency to stay more focused. If we're just talking in our head, we get distracted a lot. And the other bit that I would add to that is that communication between the world of spirit and the world of the living is in many ways like a police mirror. And this is not to say that it has anything to do with incrimination or investigation. It's more to say that a police mirror is a one-way mirror in which on one side, the side that the officer's standing on, is the side that can see into the other side and hear into the other side clearly. While the side of the person who would be on the interrogation side, remember, I'm not saying they're being interrogated, I'm saying that they are on the side where their perception is they know there's somebody on the other side of the mirror. And sometimes they can feel there's somebody on the other side of the mirror, but they can't hear the person or see the person, at least not very often or very well. And so there's this disconnect. A medium is a person who can walk between the two and be like, well, this is what they're saying over here. Oh, this is what they're saying over here. But the point I'm trying to make is that your dead can hear you. They can see you. As a medium, I've done so many different seances and individual sessions where I've had spirits describe people's bedrooms. And I'm telling this lady, so you painted your walls purple and it looks like you've got curtains hanging up all over the room. I don't quite understand that. And in truth, what had happened is, yes, she had painted her room purple after her husband died, and she had a very large bedroom, and it felt too big and too overwhelming without him in there. So she had hung up curtains to partition the room. And so when she was like, how do you know that? I was like, because he's in your house, because he can see that you've made these changes. So often when you meet with somebody for spirit communication, it's not uncommon for them to mention things that are happening in your everyday life. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the communication, because it shows me that that spirit is still around you, that they are actively interacting with you. They will tell me about, children in the house who have pictures of them by their bedside and how they play with them in their room, and that the mom who I'm talking to does know that her child has spoken to their grandparent. They will talk about the description of everyday life things as a way of letting us know that they're still interacting with us, that they're still watching over us. And that means that when we feel like we haven't been able to say goodbye in a traditional way, that we can still say goodbye and we can still create a different kind of relationship with that beloved dead through our actions. I really stress an altar. A lot of times people have something that's very similar to it anyways. Like when our dead pass, we have a tendency to want to set up like a shrine almost of sorts with pictures of them, or maybe it's got their car keys on it, maybe it's got their favorite hat on it. It's something that is completely personal and makes you think about that person. That's the kind of altars that I'm talking about. Ancestor altars should be in many ways a living, interacting thing. If your son really loved Snicker bars, then putting a mini Snickers bar or something on the altar for him is a way of telling him, like, I know you like sweets in here, I know you're here. He's not going to physically eat it. He'll enjoy it if you physically eat it and talk about him while you're eating it. That's a great way to give honor to our loved ones, like to have that cup of coffee while you're talking about your grandmom, and to, listen to your husband's favorite music while you're telling stories about him, or, teaching your kids how to make donuts with your grandmother's, lard kettle or whatever. These are all just ways in which we can really give honor. And yes, ideally we want to be able to uphold the traditions that we know. And yes, you can do that at some point. At some point when the air is clear and it's okay for us to gather, you can have your traditional morning ceremony or celebration of life in the way that feels right to you. But you don't have to wait, and your spirit shouldn't have to wait. Your beloved dead shouldn't have to wait until then.